I'm pretty sure a lot of you remember watching Looney Tunes as a kid. I mean, come on, that's Warner Brothers, one of the greatest animation studios around, second only to Disney. And I'm 95% sure I remember. Anyway, my favorite character was Sylvester the cat. That was until one night back in December of '98. I saw an episode that rather frightened me. But since that cartoon played at late at night, when I should have already been in bed, I was only half asleep, so I've only was able to remember parts of it. It's like a creepy TV in Sylvester's room that turned on all by itself. I thought maybe it was a nightmare. Sadly, it wasn't. The next summer, me and my brother were bored on an afternoon, so we decided to go watch some TV. We flicked to the Cartoon Network just in time to watch some good old-fashioned Looney Tunes, one of my favorite shows at the time. It played 2 normal episodes of Sylvester. Again, nothing special except for one thing. When the second part was coming to its end, me and my brother felt like something wasn't right. We thought that it might show that certain episode once again. And indeed, it happened. The episode I'm trying to talk about and trying to get to the point about is a episode known as Angry Sylvester, one that I personally dubbed due to, well, what you're about to hear. The episode didn't have the same intro that most Looney Tunes cartoons had, neither that catchy little title music. It just skipped right to the title screen. It didn't even fade, it just switched right there. There was no title written on screen, it just showed what looked to be a living room in the house, and it looked to be drawn entirely of only 2 colors, blood red and black as the emptiness of the scene. There wasn't any music either. The only sound that could be heard during this part was a woman saying, "Directed by." Now, the creepy thing is that I, of course, translated that for you, but it broadcasted it into our country's native language, Hungarian. And this was way before the time CN started broadcasting in our country's native language. It also sounded as if the announcer was being forced to do it. Almost as if someone is holding a gun to her head and she had a rather shaky voice. Then the episode started. Once again, it didn't fade to the beginning, it just switched right there. It showed Sylvester standing in front of something that looked similar to a military base, tents or around. There wasn't any music either, or sound, just dead silence. Sylvester also didn't look like he did in the other cartoons. He looked badly bruised and badly beaten. His eyes had no pupils. He didn't say anything. He just looked really angry. Now, this wasn't very cartoonish. It just looked a little disturbing. I can't really put my finger on it. In the next scene, he would enter the military base. It was empty. No guards, no soldiers, no nothing. But again, this might not be a military base, so I'm only going off what I can remember. Sylvester still entered, despite this thing I mentioned before, and he wanted to get revenge on some people for what they did to him, or so it seemed. So he decided to sabotage the military base by destroying all the lights hanging from the ceiling. The scene looked very disturbing while Sylvester was tearing down the lights with his claws, which grew to ridiculous sizes. They were all covered in blood and oil. The only sound that could be heard during the scene was also the sound of sparking electricity, which sounded very loud and frighteningly realistic. The scene was also flashing rapidly, which only made the scenes look more scary in my own opinion. Also, dangerous to the people who suffer from epilepsy. Now, I'm unsure how it works exactly, but rather odd. This same scene also repeated itself 10 times until the next one. In the next scene, Sylvester was at home. However, Granny, Tweety, and Hector were nowhere to be found. He was all alone in his room that looked empty and scary. The floor was blood red. The walls looked as if they were on fire or recently had been. The room contained 2 tables, a large one that had something that looks like a toy Dalek and a screwdriver on it, and a smaller one that had an ancient TV on it. There was also a window in the background, but its beams were misaligned and it looked like an inverted crucifix. Also, outside it was pitch black. Not as if it was like night outside, mind you, but like there was literally no existence outside that the window could perceive. So Sylvester proceeded to repair his toy derelict with the screwdriver. That when suddenly the TV on the smaller table behind him turned on by itself. The TV showed an extremely creepy cartoon. The background music sounded like as if somebody was just banging on a random electric guitar, and the recording was reversed and played back that way. It started by showing a forest and with a cartoony moon above it, with an extremely disturbing look on its face. A few seconds later, it switched to a long room. The room was empty, but something could be heard lurking at the end of the room, and it made a really off-putting metallic thumping sound with every step. A few seconds later, it switched to the other end of the room. Porky Pig was standing there. He looked angry, and he was holding a pistol in his hand, but he didn't look bruised like Sylvester did. He said something to the monster in the other room and then fired his gun a few times. After that, it went to static. And then, a few seconds later, a really loud banging was heard. The screen faded to red. A few seconds later, the red screen faded back to Sylvester's room. And he's just standing in his room, standing next to the wreckage of his TV. He looked even more angry, even more bruised, and his eyes, they were blood red this time. And the creepy image of angry Sylvester stayed on the screen for about 10 seconds, and then it just went to black. About a minute later, the Cartoon Network came back with his normal "coming up next" screen. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the review. Now, I have stopped doing this, but I think you may like the revamped format. Nonetheless, why don't we dive right into Angry Sylvester and why this story is, quite frankly, terrible. Now, don't get me wrong, when I went into this, I wasn't saying, oh my gosh, another lost episode, or something along those lines. But rather, I was actually rather excited, and I was I've gotten several requests and seen this creepypasta in many top lists. But to be frank, after reading it, I am unsure why. The story is cliched. Now, don't get me wrong, there is some great background imagery, such as, the shaky voice of the narrator who is in, the Hungarian narrator, or the use of the word anger or angry, which invokes odd mixed feelings for some reason. But the story is ultimately killed by, something I would like to call a cliche counter. Instead of focusing on the story, I get barred down, and I find myself focusing on how many cliches the story will present to me by the end. The overuse of the word creepy and scary only helps the make it even worse. The wordplay is awful. There's a scene that quite literally says, Sylvester was watching a ancient TV with a scary cartoon, which had a dark, creepy forest, and then a scary moon over that. If you have to tell your audience that your story is scary, you're doing it wrong. Try to show, don't tell. That's what I heard from many writers and all that type of things. You can have a short, very creepy episode of something and have it be a generally good thing, as long as you make it so that the ideas that are presented relate to the content and source material very accurately without going overboard. Sadly, this creepypasta does nothing but decide to say blood red, creepy black, endless nothing. It's terrible. I can't focus on the story, and to be frank, the more I look at it, the more I read about it, I only can help question, why do people like this? It's a bad story. However, some of the ideas presented are rather good, but in the end, I would give it a pass if you want to read it on your own. If you're simply listening to me narrate it and didn't rip on it, I guess that's alright. This has been your host, That Creepy Reading, and let me know how you like the new format, and in the end, let me know if I should continue doing things like this.